Hello, everybody. Welcome back to OneTAKE Live. I am your host, Ian Barkin. And for those of you who are not familiar with the OneTAKE format, this is an outstanding opportunity for me. So somewhat selfish, I suppose, but I get to speak to visionaries, leaders, and really movers and shakers in the future of work, life, and culture. And that also entails the sort of a relationship that we have with resources in our planet. So I'm really excited today to talk about the future of energy as one of the key topics. But before I get started, just want to say to everyone, I hope everyone is healthy, safe, and well out there. If you do find yourself looking for an opportunity, looking for work, Sykes is always hiring. So please do check out jobs.sykes.com. Again, jobs.sykes.com. We have an outstanding work at home capability. So many people are exploring that, both enterprises looking to work with us and people looking to pick up jobs where they can work from the safety of their own home with the world's leading brands. So without further ado, as I teased, the future of energy is something that's on the top of a lot of people's minds, especially as the world is using some less energy recently and starting to see mountains in the distance and fish swimming through canals. So I couldn't be more excited to welcome my next guest, Robert Poor, to OneTAKE. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hi, Ian. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. So, Robert, this is where I talk about you and you awkwardly sit there and then have to correct me about all of the inaccuracies. I will not go into some of your earlier career choices because they're super interesting, and I'll leave those to you. But you and I have known each other for probably 16, 17 years. And it dates back to what we were at the time calling machine to machine, which is now commonly called Internet of Things. You had just gotten a master's and a PhD from MIT in media arts and sciences. Right. You co-founded a company called Ember that I was lucky enough to cover as an industry research analyst and consultant covering machine to machine. And you also were a pioneer in that space as far as helping define just what it is that we were talking about and what it is we were trying to achieve. So you set up the Wireless Industrial Networking Alliance, or WINA, or WINA. You also were the chair of the IEEE initiative, the 802.15.4b, which was a standards body that focused specifically on the Zigbee protocol. So you have been an absolute innovator, mover, shaker, definer of what we're now calling the Internet of Things space. That's how I knew you, but you're doing some really exciting things now because you've just co-founded what you're calling, or not just, but you co-founded and you're the chairman of what you call Cool Energy World. So with that long intro, start us off. How did you get started? What did you want to be when you grew up? And there are some crazy cool stories you've got before you even bump into this whole machine-to-machine space.
Right. Well, ages ago, long time ago, I found I was always interested in technology as a kid, but I also love music. And what that translated into was when I graduated from high school, I got a job in San Francisco at a place called Alembic, which was the technical arm of the Grateful Dead. So I got exposed to music and technology in just the way I loved it. But then something interesting happened. A couple members of the Grateful Dead went down to Stanford University and got involved in the computer music center there called CRMA, CCRMA. And to me, this was like, chocolate and peanut butter. Like you can do computers and music. And that led me down to Stanford. And just a lot of interesting things followed there. The music department was part of the Stanford AI project, which meant I got to rub shoulders with some of the most amazing technical innovators around, doing robotics and vision systems and early AI stuff. And that just led to a tumble of really interesting other opportunities. I ended up working at George Lucas's company, called, it was the computer R&D group of Lucasfilm, which later morphed into Pixar. And I was helping build a laser film printer because George Lucas understood early on that the future of film was not analog, but was digital. And one thing led to another, and I ended up going on to work with Steve Jobs at his company called Next when he was in between Apple and Apple, which also put me in touch with a lot of really amazing folks. And after I kind of ran my course in Silicon Valley, I thought, maybe someday I should actually go get a degree. So that took me to MIT. And it was at MIT I discovered you could have radios and you could have microcontrollers, and you could put these two things together. And suddenly you could give these little tiny microcontrollers the knowledge of the whole internet. And that's what led to the whole Ember and Internet of Things direction that my life pivoted to at that point.
I mean, that right there is probably easily the coolest sort of origin story, evolution to how you got to, and that was the middle course, because you're now moving on to other exciting things. Although there is a relationship between them, but let's there's some other things I want to relate to. I had a summer internship when I was really passionate about entertainment, and through a connection through my aunt, I was lucky enough to land a job at Skywalker Sound once.
Oh wow!
And I spent the summer at the ranch out on Lucas Valley Road. I never met George there, but I did get to hang out with people like Gary Rydstrom and others who were like absolutely.
Was Ben Burt still there? Ben
Burt was still there. Yep. Yeah.
Great.
I was nowhere near cool enough to actually work closely with any of those individuals, but it's so cool to see how there's this intersection between technology and music and art and entertainment. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to Boston. So you're at MIT. You bump into another gentleman who's also passionate about the same space, and you come up with the idea of, as you said, combining a few technologies to create these sort of low power networks that can be deployed effectively everywhere and anywhere. And that's where you and I met, because I was covering what we were calling machine to machine at the time. And I fondly remember you teaching me about the application of Zigbee and of M2M in every sort of industry and space, but specifically in buildings, and how you could enable lighting ballasts and HVAC systems and everything else to just be intelligent, and to enable you to more proactively manage assets and maintain these systems. So walk us through Ember, because there's some real interesting relationships between that and then some of the work you did after that. What were the technologies you were using and the problems you were helping solve?
Well, the real insight was that silicon was getting cheaper exponentially, a la Moore's Law. It was still faithfully coming down in price. But in those days, even the simplest radio would cost like $25. And you could buy an Ethernet cable for like $2.50. So why would you ever use a radio to link together little computers when radios are so much more expensive than an Ethernet cable? Well, the answer is Moore's Law. We realized, Andy Wheeler is my co-founder at Ember, and he's fantastic. I think he's smarter than all of us put together here. But the insight was that radios would continue to get cheaper exponentially. And at some point, that would become the preferred method of connecting little tiny computers to each other, because the overhead and the cost of wired infrastructure is going way too high. The problem we had to solve was that all of the networking protocols for computers in those days were for great big computers. They expected to have a lot of memory, a lot of processing power, a lot of energy available to them. And our insight was, what if you just treat radios like radios and let them broadcast each other, and let the neighbors nearby who are listening help relay the messages on? And that became multi-hop messaging and peer-to-peer and the whole thing that now that IoT is built upon. But that was a new thing in those days.
So, and a lot of places to go from there, just because that really did revolutionize how people were looking at making different environments smart and connected.
Right.
And
that's right.
I mean, also mobile assets. I remember all sorts of exciting discussions about how do you enable a truck. I did some really cool projects on how do you track smaller assets that move faster, but so couldn't have GPS devices strapped to the side of them, because you couldn't justify the cost, nor did you need that or you needed more granular locational data than within sort of 3 meters. So how have you? I mean, did we foresee all the challenges? Did we solve all the problems, and then it was just a matter of just eventual adoption of technology and Moore's law and prices dropping to get us to where we are today? Because stuff's still not connected to the degree that we anticipated that it would be 15, 16 years ago.
That is a rich and complicated question. I think a lot of things have been solved in the sense that nowadays for $1.50, you can buy a microcontroller with a radio built in. And so there's just an amazing amount of stuff you can do with that. As is the case with a lot of shiny new technologies, bunches of companies have jumped in and says, hey, we can make a smart X. I just hate the prefix smart put in front of another product. They're literally smart toothbrushes on the market, where it keeps track of how much you've brushed your teeth, and it sends it to your website or your homepage or something. And I don't think that's really solving the problems we really want to be looking at.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it does mean that we can have much finer grained monitoring of important resources. What's the temperature of the transformer outside your house? Is it going to be overloaded once people plug in more EVs?
Right.
One of the first places that Ember got its big commercial success was putting chips in electric meters. So instead of somebody having to come out and individually read each meter, the data would trickle into the home base, and they could actually instead of taking readings every 30 days, they could take readings every 5 minutes.
Right.
And that allowed them to do much better resource planning for how you're generating electricity, how you're distributing the energy, and all that. So I think those are some of the places where it's really been proven to be useful.
Perfect. I'm getting better at this. I should have done this earlier. If you are listening, if we're lucky enough to have you listening to this OneTAKE live right now, please take a moment to share your name and where you are listening in from. I will say first, hello to Kedwin from Marin. How are you, Kedwin? We've got David from Tampa, Dane from Dallas. That's a nice alliteration. Jim from Tampa. Thank you, Jim. Katrina from Providence. AJ from Indianapolis. Bill Thomas, how the heck are you? Thank you for listening in. Gloria from California. So please keep sharing that you're here with us. And if you have any questions, absolutely post them. So, okay. So the smart power meter solution was an interesting one because it had a business case that could be made several different times via evolutions in capability effectively. Right. So the very first one was you didn't have to have someone driving around and checking each meter manually. And it also gave you the ability to just collect more information. Right. But it still was just a one-way feed. You were being informed, but it didn't enable you to actually control that to head off things like blackouts because of overuse or demands on the system during heat waves. Right. So but I guess the point was we were constantly trying to solve for how do you put the right radio in the right asset to get you the right amount of information at the right price point. Mm-hmm. And whether it was in the short, medium, long range, we were talking Zigbee and Wi-Fi and WiMAX, and then all the way to satellite. You had motes all the way to full-on GPS devices for car telematics. I'm pivoting here just because those were some of the constraints. We've got 5G on the horizon. Does that completely change the dynamic of the discussion?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because there's so many devices that couldn't, just to put it simply, the battery wouldn't last. Yeah. If it's a 5G device. So I think there's always going to be room for multi-tiered systems where you've got, I'm working with little systems here on my cluttered workbench that will last for 2 years on just a couple of AA cells. And they use wireless communication. And, there'll always be room for that. one of the areas I really am excited about is healthcare and telehealth care, where it isn't just a one-way thing, but it's two ways. My mom has my mom has a pacemaker, and her doctor can remotely monitor how her pacemaker is doing. And I think that is just cool. And that's the kind of stuff that's become available, in the last, not even the last decade, but even more recently.
Right.
So
the batteries in healthcare devices, and this an interesting example because it's one that I personally have a lot of passion for and a lot of I guess frustration with, which was I had a great uncle who passed away a few years ago, but his hearing was going. He was in his late 90s. Just truly stellar individual. He was the youngest guy you ever met. He was just energetic, but he couldn't hear. And the battery sizes for those damn hearing aids pissed me off with these stupid little stickers for people who have the least dexterity to have to deal with that when we were wirelessly charging our toothbrushes every day for the last 2 decades. And so it really, that solving the battery problem is a huge one, no matter what walk of life, what industry, and we were looking at piezoelectric stuff too, things that would just charge as you moved. But okay, so 5G doesn't solve a lot of problems because you still got the battery issue.
Well, I didn't say. It will solve a bunch of problems. Yep. I think the domain that we're really interested in is like these myriad little devices that help our planet work a little bit better. And those probably won't be big 5G consumers. On the other hand, you'll have a collection of these things. Let's take the transformers on the posts outside your house as an example, that will trickle their data to a 5G gateway and use that as a higher bandwidth concentration point. Right. So sure, there'll be a lot of things that are made possible with higher bandwidth communication, but it won't be in every device.
Okay. So let's pivot. Thank you for indulging me because I still absolutely love that time period in my career of looking at machine to machine and enabling devices and getting information. And I still think we're really early on in truly leveraging those capabilities. But you had another passion, and you had a passion for the environment, for the earth. So tell me about that.
Well, is
it a pivot or was it like a natural progression? How did you get there?
There's actually a progression.
Okay.
And it goes like this. We're at Ember, and we're selling these little chips for about $2.50. And because it's the semiconductor industry, the margins get squeezed every season. The margins get squeezed harder and harder. And we had customers, in fact, one of them is my client right now, who's taking these little chips, these little $2.50 chips, and putting them in a home entertainment box and selling the box for $2,500. And that I said, there's got to be something more interesting that you can do with these chips that can give you a bigger margin. And that's actually what turned me on to the whole thing about building energy management and smart systems in buildings, and how could you bring down the operational cost of buildings. And I just realized that there's a huge opportunity for reducing energy wastage in buildings based on occupancy, based on lights, based on all sorts of stuff that you normally couldn't control, suddenly become controllable costs.
Right.
And at that point, I started hounding all of my friends and neighbors for their home energy information and started doing analytics on it and realized, you can actually take very few data points and figure out if a home is efficient or not. I built a thermal model which said, if the outdoor temperature is X and the indoor temperature is Y and you're using this much energy, then you can tell how efficient your house is. And that really led me down the path of thinking about energy in general. And it's proven to be a really interesting thing because when I started looking at it, solar energy was horribly expensive. Let's see, I have a figure. In 2009, solar energy, commercial scale, utility scale commercial solar was about $350 per megawatt hour. And 9 years later, it is 1/10 of that. It has come down by a factor of 10. And this plays into my passion about exponential curves. You know, when I started Ember, we were looking at the fact that Moore's law was going to bring the cost down exponentially. Same thing is happening now with not only solar, but also with batteries. And you put those two things together, and the world is going to be very different, probably as soon as 5 years from now in the whole energy world.
Okay. So explain for our listeners what the, I guess, what are the dynamics of an exponential curve?
I guess the simplest way to think about it is you get a same percentage drop or percentage increase, depending which way you're going, every year.
Okay.
So, you know, if it comes down 10% every year, I haven't done the math, but after 10 years, it's a tiny fraction of what it was before. So yeah, I think 20% a year gets you from a factor of 10 reduction over 10 years.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so if you're in that industry, I mean, adopting it's very attractive because it gets a whole lot cheaper. But if you make it, if you're the one selling it, is it equally as attractive?
I think you just said you want to be on the correct side of the exponential curve, right?
Yes.
The fact is, what's really going on is that the field is expanding so fast that even if you are a producer, you'll have lots more customers in the next couple of years, even though there will be price pressure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I expected you to say, especially because it's competing against comparables. Where, as you said, only a few years ago it was so prohibitively expensive, it was more of a passion buy, and now it just would make complete sense to get, just because it's so much darn cheaper, whether you are in it for the green or not.
So here's what's really crazy, and I wouldn't assume that your customers are really, really into what utility companies do and all that kind of stuff. But this is an interesting thing I just stumbled across. There's this website I love called Lazard, Lazard. And every year they come out with something called the levelized cost of energy and also the levelized cost of storage. And that they basically look at all the different ways of making electricity and how much it really costs by the time you factor in what it takes to build a plant, what it takes to borrow the money, what it takes to service it, what it takes to maintain it, what it takes to feed it. Here's the crazy thing. In the last couple of years, it has become cheaper to build renewable energy in the form of solar or wind than it is to continue to operate the cheapest conventional energy plants. And that says that pretty quickly, utility companies are going to start just shutting down they've already shut down almost all the coal plants. So that's a non-starter. But they're beginning to, and next thing is what's called the peaker plants, the gas-fired plants that turn on in the hot afternoon to generate enough electricity to run your air conditioner.
Okay.
And they're already getting replaced with solar energy plus batteries. Okay. And next in line is going to be the conventional, currently the cheapest way of making electricity is gas-fired turbines, basically, gas-fired power plants. And solar plus storage is getting even cheaper than them.
Interesting.
So as a result, there was just a report out of Berkeley that said by 2039, I think, the U.S. could be at like 90% renewable energy economically.
Okay.
And that's without subsidies, without really incredible gyrations.
Right. In a tremendous progression. So does it make sense to be in any other form of energy at this point? Does it make sense to invest in a coal plant if as you said, just operating it is more expensive than fully building a brand new something else?
Well, there is a reason you might want to invest in a coal plant. Thank you for asking. And here's how it goes.
Okay.
As solar gets cheaper exponentially, the remaining cost of everything else more or less stays the same. And for utility scale solar, their big challenge is how do you run more transmission lines? It's very hard. It's extremely expensive to get right of way to put up new high tension lines. But guess what coal plants have, right? Coal plants have huge infrastructure already with these transmission lines. So I would wager that it's going to become really attractive to buy up these shuttered coal plants and use them for their transmission line capability. And I would see putting in, big battery storage inside where the coal plant used to be.
Sure.
And save a lot of money that way, honestly.
Right. Okay. So the race is on to buy cruddy houses and good land. Effectively, you're buying shuttered plants for the storage space and for the existing grandfathered rights and infrastructure that came with them naturally. Okay. Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there an argument in that certain sources of power may be harder to sustain in certain environments where there isn't as much sun, for instance, or as much wind, et cetera? Or does that hold water?
That's entirely a reasonable question. The way that works is right now in Arizona, building a solar plant is a no-brainer. There's lots of sun. Turns out they're building solar plants in New Jersey and New York. And because the cost has come down so much, those are economical to run. And what you'll see is as the cost comes down, also, we shouldn't forget wind, by the way. Wind is still coming down exponentially. I think that just because of the physical nature of it, it won't come down for as long as solar will continue to come down. But, by the time you get up to Nova Scotia, lots of wind. So, we're finding that with a mix of solar and wind and battery storage to make up for the lulls in the wind and the sun, you can end up creating power plants that are as efficient, well, I shouldn't say efficient, as reliable and as dependable and increasingly cheaper than conventional power plants.
Okay. So the next question is the jobs one.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
Does this transition, if the cost is becoming so competitive that just capitalism means that the transition is almost inevitable, is the economics as far as the impact on jobs a positive or a negative one? Do we need to be fighting to keep the sort of the old energy jobs because they were more plentiful, or are we heading in the right direction and creating more opportunities?
Well, certainly in the short term, there's huge opportunity because it's all about building out new infrastructure.
Installations, right.
One of the interesting dynamics of wind and solar and battery is that you can do a much smaller project in a matter of measured in months, as opposed to conventional projects, which are highly centralized, last for years, and when they're done, they're done. So for conventional, there's this huge activity around getting planning and funding and building this thing, and then you have a big job market while you're building it. And the moment it's built, all the jobs vanish.
Yeah.
What's happening with renewables, of course, is that you build a site here, you move to the next one, you build a site there, you move to the next site, you build a site there.
Right.
And so I really see the job opportunities for renewables as being more sustainable and geographically more diverse than what you'll get with the conventional energy market. So for the average working person, I think it's a much better opportunity.
Interesting. Okay. So let's pivot. So we talked about you've co-founded companies in the machine-to-machine space.
Yeah.
You're the chairman and the founder of something I brought a prop just to make a reference. You're the chairman and founder of Cool Energy World. And I assume you just meant that this stuff's cool, right? As in like Fonzie cool, or oh no, I get it. It's environmental. I'm sorry.
I think
but I got to use the prop.
I'll go with Fonzie. I'll go with the Fonzie.
I'm going to put those back on as you answer this question. So
I like it.
It's Cool Energy World, and
I like it.
Yes, and why did you come to co-found it?
So first off, the URL was available.
Yes, exactly.
It's cause for many good things. But also, if you think about conventional energy, coal plants boil water, which spins a turbine. That takes heat and that takes water. Gas-fired combined cycle gas turbines fire up a turbine, use the spare to generate a motor, generate heat, and they use the waste heat to boil water to spin another turbine, which takes water to generate additional heat. So that's combined cycle gas turbine. Nuclear plants boil water or some medium or other to spin turbines to make electricity. All of those are heat generating. And also, interestingly, all of them require water. Yeah. And if you think about, the way resources are going, water itself is becoming a much scarcer resource, or much more problematic, I guess I should say. Yeah. And one of the other, I think, really interesting characteristics about wind and solar, I should say photovoltaic in particular, and battery, is that those are sources of energy that not only don't require any feedstock other than what's naturally provided by nature, but also don't require water and don't generate excess heat as part of their process.
Okay. So
that's where the cool came from.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and what is the mission of Cool Energy World?
It basically, this change is coming,
okay,
but a lot of people underestimate it. I made a little graph, and indulge me while I pull it up and just pull off some numbers. The U.S. Energy Information Administration every year plops out their predictions about what's going on with the future of energy.
Sure.
And it's really interesting how conservative they've been. In 2010, they predicted we would have 0.76 billion kilowatt hours of solar energy.
Okay.
By the year 2025. We blew past that 2 years later.
Interesting.
In 2012.
By 2025, they thought we'd have that, and we were there by 2
years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 2010, they predicted that it would take until 2025 to get there.
So in 2012, we were where they thought we'd be.
We got there.
2025. Okay.
And in 2012, they upped their estimate for 2025 to be 4.3 billion kilowatt hours. Well, we got there 2 years after that.
Interesting.
And not by, right? So my point is that the rate of adoption is going up much faster than even the experts are expecting.
Right.
Even what they're predicting.
Is this a psychology thing? I mean, there's all sorts of discussions around humans' inability to appreciate the exponential curves, whether it be technology in our lives or apparently a transition to more cool energy.
Right. It's a tough one because I don't think we are, as humans, have the synapses to actually, intuit what that means.
Yeah.
I find myself even astonished, the fact I can buy a Raspberry Pi computer for $10 with Wi-Fi built in is just like mind-boggling to me. This box that will run Unix. And so I even despite my proclivity for exponential curves and all that talk, I still find myself surprised by it. So I don't blame the EIA for underestimating how quickly we are going to adopt alternative energy. But to go back to your question, you led to this, what is Cool Energy about? Cool Energy World is really about helping people understand the transitions, but both people and businesses and planners and politicians and everything, about the implications of what's going on and the fact that it is coming a lot faster than people expect. And I think companies are really going to have to prepare for that, or else get caught flat-footed.
That's a great point. Want to take a break and welcome several other people who've shared their names with us. We've got, I said Gloria from California. We got Boaz from Israel. So hello, Boaz. PK from Chennai. Russ from Tampa. Maria from St. Pete. Dan from Orlando. Rachel, also from Florida. Bill Thomas writes and says, Robert, to a point, I don't know when he wrote it, and to the point you were making, but you'll get it, that the UK switched off their last coal generator on the 9th of April of this year.
That's right. That's right.
And so it seems that they've figured that economics out and decided that it's no longer viable to keep their coal running. Are you seeing certain countries or regions of the planet moving differently? I think the answer is probably yes, but
sure. I mean, that actually touches on a really important point, which is about policy.
Yeah.
A technology is only as expandable as local policy makes it.
Right.
And so you get countries like Spain which were really aggressive about implementing solar, and they're actually reaping the benefits from that already.
Right. All right.
To shift slightly, I guess, to get back to jobs as well as policy, Germany, watching the whole COVID thing sort of gut their economy, has allocated $2.5 billion to further the electric vehicle industry. And that's such a great idea. A bunch of that goes into additional research for batteries. A bunch of it's going to go into charging infrastructure. A lot of it's going to go into rebates for electric vehicles that are made. But generally what they're doing is they're saying, we understand that electric vehicles are the future.
Right.
And this is how we're going to restart our economy
absolutely
on the right foot.
Which is tremendous, because it's a country known for their cars and they're good, fast ones. And and so for them to make that commitment, and effectively, to some degree, to play catch up, because there's really one brand that's really grabbed the spotlight in many cases, and it's an American brand, so they want to take the top spot again, I would imagine.
I would think so. Although I've heard Elon Musk say that he welcomes the competition. I mean, that's really his overall goal, is to make electric vehicles be the dominant form of transportation. I think that's a very prescient approach. Yeah.
You've got I don't know if now is the right time. You have a visual. Should we put that up? You've got a story that you.
Oh yeah. So I was talking about, what does Cool Energy World do?
Yeah.
And I wanted to show people how quickly change can happen. So I would love to have the graphic, please. Okay. So there's two pictures.
Okay.
I don't know if you've looked at them yet. The picture on the left, what do you see?
1920s or even.
That was 19. I'll tell you. That was 1905.
1905. Okay. In New York.
How many cars do you see on the? It's New York.
Okay.
How many cars do you see on the left?
Let's see. Those are all being pulled by horses, so correct. I would go with 0.
Exactly. And the picture on the right, how many horses do you see?
Poor horses. I see no horses. Well, right. I see lots of horsepower, but no horse.
Okay. Now, do you want to guess how long it took to get from the left picture to the right picture?
Probably.
And I'll tell you, the first one is 1905.
Okay. 10 years.
It was 15.
15, okay.
15.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the transition from horse transportation to car transportation was driven by a couple things.
Okay.
And tell me if any of this sounds familiar or current. One is environmental. They had a huge environmental problem. There were 3,000. There's an army of 3,000 folks whose job was to scoop the poop every afternoon in the streets of New York City.
Which probably
so internal combustion cars were seen as the way to get out of this horrible, horrible pollution problem they had.
Okay.
So the other part was I guess the other part is purely policy. Right. I mean, there was a lot of policy put in place to transition from horses to cars because they really needed to.
Okay.
And my point is, in a 15-year span, think about that. You went from farriers to tire manufacturers to gasoline distribution. I mean, there was just an amazing amount of infrastructure that had to be created to make this possible. And so people are sort of saying, well, electric cars, where am I going to charge them? How's that going to work? And I think it goes without saying, it's just going to catch up a lot faster than a lot of people think.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I went to the LA car show.
Okay.
And I went and talked to every car manufacturer about their plans. And they all basically said, coming out at the end of 2020, you'll see our offerings for pure electric vehicles. And it may be that the whole coronavirus thing has slowed that down a bit, but the fact remains, basically every car manufacturer is going to be going that way.
Right. And the initial options were not cheaper. So it was, you had people who liked the look, liked the speed and the acceleration, or just liked the image of having one. But by economies of scale and I imagine cheaper battery technologies, they'll become more accessible to a broader population.
Batteries went from 600 milliwatt hours in 2015 to 150 milliwatt hours today. Now, that's not a fair comparison. That's actually for utility scale power.
Okay.
But you're seeing something similar in
the vehicles,
what's called transportation batteries.
Okay.
Tesla just dropped the price of the Model 3 by $2,000.
Okay.
And the Model X and the Model S by $5,000. And that's because their batteries are getting cheaper.
Interesting.
There are multiple big companies jumping into the battery industry for cars.
Okay.
And since that's a dominant cost of the electric vehicles at this point, the cost is going to come down a lot faster.
Yeah. And so everyone's now building up their infrastructure and their supply chains to provide what it is that they think the market wants. And I suppose they do. And they're great vehicles. They're quiet. I like that. And certainly, are they?
I heard that you have one.
I do, and I'm a fan of it. It's a good vehicle for a lot of different reasons. Is the battery cleaner than all the mess that it took to mine the gasoline that I would otherwise put in a car?
Yeah, I spoke to somebody years ago, and they pointed out that between running power plants off of coal and the environmental cost of creating batteries and all that kind of stuff, that the cradle to grave cost of a electric vehicle was not better than a conventional internal combustion. But probably within the last 5 years, that's completely turned around. They're building batteries now with much less cobalt, much less exotic materials. There are people who are coming out with batteries that don't use any cobalt. And companies like the Gigafactory already have a large part set aside specifically for recycling. So they're solving that problem too.
Got it.
And it's the difference between a battery and a burning gasoline is once you burn the gasoline into the environment, you can't get it back out of the air. So the battery is still in the car, and you can recycle that.
Interesting. So your point. So that there is a closed loop to some degree where you can repurpose it and okay. Well, that makes me feel better about myself. Thank you.
There you go.
There you go. Robert, this is fascinating on so many different levels. I mean, the future of, and I've spent a lot of time on future of work and life and culture and automation and things, but so much of it is influenced by this exponential scale that dictates how quickly change is happening. And it's really interesting to hear that also has an effect and plays a role in the future of energy, which truly defines so much of the future of what we do, how we get to work, where we work, how we see the work we're doing, how we generate electricity, et cetera. So thank you so much for sharing your passions and your experience. Are there any sort of final thoughts for the listeners of where they should go, what they should do if they're equally as passionate about this topic as you and I are?
There's a simple one. Already, I mean, I like to say to people, your next car is going to be an electric vehicle. And I'm not saying that just to be cute. But already, the right thing to think about is not the sticker price up front, but what's called the lifetime cost.
Sure.
And you'll find already, or total cost of ownership, I guess is the other popular term. And it's really worth working out the numbers for what you will pay for your car, because I think you'll find that now electric vehicles in almost every case will beat an internal combustion engine car. And honestly, if you still want to take that long trip to South Dakota once every summer, rent a car. just for that trip, and stick to your regular car for the shorter trips. People.
I watched over Facebook a year ago. A buddy of mine crossed the entire country from California to, I don't know where he ended up, in North Carolina or something, and did it in a Tesla and was able to do it. So it's
entirely possible. I'm just saying, if you're worried about long travel, then you can always rent a car.
Rent the RV that everyone in the nation is now scrambling to rent because we can't fly anywhere.
That's true too.
Yeah. No, that's spectacular and good to hear, and amazing to see how ultimately that marriage of distributed smart technologies, smarter buildings, and just a better way of powering all that we do and all that we use in life is on the horizon. It gives me faith, just in a news cycle where so much of it seems bad. It's nice to have some positive outlook and opportunity on the horizon.
Well, I'm just hoping the United States will do something along the lines of what we described for Germany, which is this is a great time to pour a lot of money into developing infrastructure for which there's a future, as opposed to try to prop up the past.
Right.
So that's my political soapbox of the day.
There we go. And I think it was in your bio, or you sent it to me or something, but it struck me as a great way to close the show. But you'd said that your goal is to, quote unquote, make a good dent on the world. Yeah. And so I think it's clear that you're working hard to do that, and not just a dent, but a good dent. I liked a good dent. I liked the clarification. So thanks again, Robert Poor. Really, really appreciate you spending the time with me and with the OneTAKE listeners. And thank you, OneTAKE listeners, for spending your time with Robert and me. So with that, we'll wrap up the show and hope everyone's safe and well. And we'll speak to you again very soon. Take care, everybody.